Morning, everyone. I'm just trying to get organized in such a way that I can see the the chat. There it is. Okay. Why is that doing that? Okay. Um, so I'm going to type it in here, and we are on the air. Um, so this morning, what I thought I would do, the title of the essay that we're going to read today is in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And uh, what and the essay we're going to be reading is Confronting Jung, The Red Book Speaks to Our Time by John Hill. But before I get into that, what I want to do is I want to go back into the essay by Thomas Arst, um, because in there he talks about creating your own red book. And it seems to me more and more important that we consider doing this because um, this is one of the main issues is related to our mental health. And so I want to let me just see if I've successfully gotten uh, my picture. I did. Okay, there it is. Okay, so you've heard me refer to this uh, phrase many times on this program, um, and it seems to me that this is about the most important sentence I ever read in Jungian psychology, because here, Dr. Lawrence Jaffe, who was the son of Agnella Jaffe, who was the secretary to Jung in the creation of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his memoir. Dr. Lawrence Jaffe summarized everything that Jungian psychology is about. And in so doing, he actually summarized everything that all religions are about as well. And this is my opinion, and I'll ask my panelists to comment on it. But let's read it once again. It's one sentence. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Dr. Lawrence Jaffe. Okay, now that's a very, very powerful sentence because it's saying that our unconscious can heal us, and surely it can. And I give an example. I'll give an example of a funeral ceremony in any religion you care to choose. The person who's died, um, I hold that human being is dead, and it goes like this. Um, when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. When you're stupid, it works the same way. And the point being that a funeral service is not going to bring back the dead. But what it will do is open up your unconscious in such a way that your unconscious can heal you, the living, um, from the cost, the loss, the human aspect of dying. Um, and so all religious services, rituals, do something like that. They open the unconscious and allow our psyche to heal us. And so, for example, at a wedding ceremony, there may be suitors that didn't get the bride. There may be other people that don't like the wedding very much. But if you're at a wedding ceremony, what happens to you is that um, your unconscious is opened up by your religious ritual. And the result is that um, you start to accept the bride or the groom into your family. And then they become actual family. So are there any comments that you have, either Brian or Jordan, about this opening statement of mine?
I think I've started to refer to the unconscious. I full agreement to people to do a red book or some kind of journal, or even conscious paying attention to spaces between. I think, it's just like the kind of tortoise as a talisman, where the flat foot fully touches the ground, but goes slow enough so you experience the steps and also the passage of the space between the steps. So it's not all checking things off a grocery list. It's generative. Things are enlivened. So I think bringing up Lawrence Jaffe there, um, the healing power of the unconscious, I've started to call it the midnight ocean.
Yeah.
When you're floating in water, you're fully supported tangentially at all sides. And that's a little overly technical. It should probably be softer. You're just fully supported. But if you envision that at night too, with no stars, and you're out in the ocean, um, there's a certain living external womb there. And I think there's an unconscious piece there where, personally, I feel that the unconscious is soulful and dark and depthful and below, and spirit is conscious and light and heights above. And I think we inhabit the space of the confluence between spirit and soul. And I think we are that border guard, or customs agent, where we have both. So I think you bringing that up to start today is so important, with a nourishing power of the healing power of the unconscious, so that it's not always I do X, then Y happens. It's I can go out and take a walk, and I'm not looking for yellow cars or butterflies. So, my inspections are just checked at the door. And I may see something new, a flower, an ant, or something that really, I think, opens the curiosity and wonderment. And it's like kids, they're youthful. And I think not just because they're young, I think they're youthful because they're inhabited by curiosity and wonderment instead of
Right.
competition and strategy. So I don't, that choose 1.5 cents there. So to say I agree.
Okay. So then I want to go on to this passage in Thomas Arth's article, The Way of What Is to Come, where he says that Jung was recommending everyone create their own red book. But it's my insight now, after studying this and thinking about this particular article for many years, that what they were talking about was they want you to find a way to open your unconscious. And what all of us who are creative have learned is that it's creative acts which open our unconscious. And those creative acts can be anything. It can be making dinner for your family. It can be a tradition of your father making pancakes on Sunday morning. Um, all those things open your unconscious. It can be, making a beautiful table for your home. It doesn't have to be a perfect table that everybody in the world would love and want to purchase. It's just something that you're doing, whether it's um, you know, setting fence posts out on the back 40, or whatever it is that you do in your life that's creative. In my case, it's, you know, um, counseling troubled young men mostly, young men who are 13 to 15 years old and they're passing through puberty, and they don't know what is expected of them. Many of them do not have uh, fathers in the home anymore. And so my creative act is to um, present to them a model of the masculine and how it can be, without being overly charged with the masculine. In other words, I'm not going to come in with a AK-47 and start yelling orders and that sort of thing. I'm going to come in and talk about um, how they need to be doing this too. They need to be learning what their role is in life. And it doesn't matter what it is, but each of us has a place. And if you waste your opportunity, you might end up in jail. And then what? What have you done? What are you doing? But if you do something creative, then uh, you can have that. So by a red book, I mean the result of these creative acts, whether it's the corral that you built with your drilling fence posts, or the table and chairs that you built for your home, out of your with your bare hands, or whether it's just cutting the grass on a Sunday morning or Saturday morning at your house, and what you're creating is an environment for your family to live in, and that too is a creative act. And so that, to me, amounts to the creating of a red book, because what you're leaving behind then, if you're cutting your grass, first of all, you're opening your unconscious, because most of us aren't, uh, very consciously cutting the grass. We're driving around a yard, but we're, you're giving yourself a chance to think, maybe, and that opens your unconscious and gives you a sense of what you ought to be doing. And so in that sense, I think that everybody who creates something, whether it's creating a family, whether it's creating dinner, what have you, is creating their own red book. And if you put your heart into it, then that's going to help you psychologically. It's going to help heal you all the time, it seems to me.
I
Jordan, comments?
appreciate you bring two things, bringing up the family actions examples. It reminds me of the grandma's roast story. I've told it so many times, I won't go into that one. But, it's about the sovereignty of make sure you think for yourself. And
Right.
think that with the creativity, what happens is people will experience no instruction manual, no rules, no instructions, no guidelines. And that action then starts to birth, generate, and establish sovereignty. You are yourself responsible and accountable, except you're neither. You're just drawing. And what happens is you start to open up into, well, what am I conscientiously responsible for? What am I accountable for or to? And then you can discern and establish that instead of like those 13 year old boys. You're showing them the masculine example of I'm unthreatened. That probably came from going through the shit. But the thing is, what happens, because well, I've had worse. So, you listen better. But I think what happens is they start to, if they can see their sovereignty, that they are something, they generate something, that they have a currency of value, they start to become strong enough to be gentle and fierce enough to be compassionate. I mean, it's like me, if someone comes, hopping through the plaza at night or something, and maybe they're a little tipsy, who knows? But they're a little belligerent, a little aggressive. Well, other than, I need you to leave right now. That's the period. Those last words that you're going to hear from me. And they can whine and moan and scream all they want, and I will continue to edge forward slowly, but silently. And it's amazing. North Pole magnet. When there's just bluster, they keep moving back. So you kind of chase out the little rodents, as it would be. And I think those boys at that age too are impressionable in that I see most fights in that area, and even with adult men, start when someone aggresses, but then one of them thinks the crowd thinks they're wimpy. They need to establish themselves. The problem with that is then you're concerned about what other people think, and that's not sovereignty. But if, like decades in the martial arts, well, there comes a point where you just don't flinch. I mean,
right.
First going to have to be pretty big. So I appreciate that you're showing them that healthy masculine energy, because honestly, you hear all this toxic masculinity. Well, that comes from an over masculinized femininity of gold digging and such, where then the men have to be peacocks. And and the thing is, peacock feathers out is a state of arousal, whether it's physical, sexual, or what have you. But it's also superficial.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a mating dance. But if people live in that constant fantasy of being, their adrenals are just, Brian can probably speak to this better, but their adrenals are always on. They're always in a state of arousal, which basically keeps them tired. And when you're tired, you fight demons you conquered long ago. So I think what happens is they stay in the cesspool instead of getting in the unconscious. So I appreciate your teaching that example.
Yeah. And this carries over to the animal world. I've a few times discussed the family building activity of osprey, for example. Osprey mate for life. And they do, in order to mate, they do three things. The male has to do a sky dance, quote unquote, where he impresses the female that he's a healthy osprey. He has to bring her a fish so that she can eat it, so that she knows he's a good provider. And then he has to build a nest for her. And if he builds the nest and feeds her and is a good provider, then she's going to agree to let him mate with her. And the result is that, 40 days later or something like that, eggs start to be born and put in the nest. And then she sits on the nest for another 40 days while the male is doing most of the fishing and feeding her. And then he has to feed not only her, but also the babies. And she teaches them how to eat and how to live in the nest. And then he teaches them, or they both teach him, how to fish and fly and so on. And so and it's all done without words.
Mhm.
It's all done by look, see, this is how we do it type thing. Well, you know, if I take my mother-in-law as a good example of a mother archetype, she has lived a life. She's nearly 94 years old now, and she's lived the life of a perfect archetypal mother. And what that means is that she uh, found a husband and married him, lived happily with him for decades, uh, brought two children into the world. He protected her throughout his lifetime. And then in his old age, when he had Parkinson's disease, she cared for him for 15 years. It was not a trivial activity. And then when he died, she came to Annapolis, where I live, and joined Debbie and me, and ultimately moved in with us. So now she's in our home. And after my mother died by a transference, she in effect became my mother. And and so we are doing everything that we can do to make her end of life process as happy and joyful as we possibly can. And so far, that's been working out pretty well. She lives with us, and we take care of her. And, this is the way we as a species care for one another. Now, other people have much more complicated lives, obviously. Um, and and so that's all well and good, but you see that there are certain things that are natural in life, and one of those things is creation. And my mother-in-law created a family and did it perfectly, and the result is that she now has basically a home to live in her old age. And so, by the way, I'm wearing this just to protect my sutures. I did have surgery um, on Thursday for carpal tunnel syndrome. I'll have to do that one more time this fall. And it was not a very serious surgery. It was 15 minutes. I basically had a Band-Aid on it after I woke up, and there are 3 stitches there, which I'm just protecting for one more day before I go back to school, and then I'll still have the sutures, but I don't have to protect it from getting infected. All right, so now what I wanted to do here then is read a couple of pages of Thomas Ar's article about having your own red book. But when you hear him talking about having your own red book, keep in mind that what my insight is that you don't have to have a red scrapbook that you write calligraphy in. That's not what we're talking about. What you have to have is something that you have created which gives you satisfaction, and that will open the healing power of individuation for you, because you'll see that this is in your purpose in life, whatever it is. And so let me just read this to you.
So before you, sounds like
Yeah,
you had
go
the
ahead.
surgical carpal tunnel procedure, not the old traditional Bible.
The
The,
old,
you
what was the old traditional Bible?
the Bible procedure. The Bible was always the biggest book in the house, so they would tell you to look this way. You put your hand on the table, and they take the Bible and smack. and just rupture them. So,
Oh, is that right? Oh my God.
so
Yeah, I had the surgical version.
yeah, I
Good Lord.
yeah, the Bible procedure is what someone I I took drums in college at one point, and I had my wrist was bent in a way it was just subtle, but it was then torquing rather than just up and down. It was a torsional movement. Well, so on my left hand, obviously it must have been more pronounced because I got these half-inch bumps. And I'm like, oh my God, is there such thing as wrist cancer? I have tumors. I had no idea. And so I discovered carpal tunnel, and those were the tendons that were the walls weakened and spread. And someone says, oh, well, you could just do the Bible procedure. And then I found out about that. I didn't do it, but um, so anyway, so it sounds like you had the one that's probably a little more, let me say, controlled and successful.
Right. So anyway, I'm reading from the first chapter, or first essay, which is in this book by Thomas Sars. Um, and it's the first essay of the 5-volume series as well. And it begins on page 36. And so here I'm quoting. Edinger notes in his Ion Lectures, quote, as it gradually dawns on people one by one that the transformation of God is not just an interesting idea, but is a living reality, it may begin to function as a new myth. Whoever recognizes this myth as his own personal reality will put his life in the service of this process. Such an individual offers himself as a vessel for the incarnation of deity and thereby promotes the ongoing transformation of God by giving him human manifestation. Such an individual will experience their life as meaningful and will be an example of Jung's statement, quote, the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person in humanity, brings about a Christification of many, unquote. So anyway, then I'm going to skip a little bit, but in seeking to assist a patient in finding a way to her individuation process and the rediscovery of soul, Jung recommended creating a personal red book. Quote, I should advise you to put it all down as beautifully as you can in some beautifully bound book. It will seem as if you were making the visions banal, but when you need to do that, then you are freed from the power of them. If you do that with these eyes, for instance, they will cease to draw you. You should never try to make the visions come again. Think of it in your imagination and try to paint it. Then, when these things are in some precious book, you can go to the book and turn over the pages. And for you, it will be your church, your cathedral, the silent places of your spirit, where you will find renewal. If anyone tells you that it is morbid or neurotic and you listen to them, then you will lose your soul, for in that book is your soul. And so what I'm saying is that that book can be your family, it can be your church, it can be the contributions you make to your community, it can be raising a son or a daughter, it can be keeping a beautiful home for 40 years and living in it, and so on. And if you do that with reverence, it's going to make a huge difference, and it creates individuation for you. And so then,
I think you hit a key word there. I mean, if you do it with reverence, that to me, doing it with reverence is that's an actionable way to experience the space between, because there's an other, there's a greater, there's a lesser, and God, be it large, small, or otherwise, nature, but doing it with reverence. And instead of happy, which just is fleeting, comes and goes like the weather, which washes through, you have gratitude. And I think
Yeah.
then joy can enter. And I think reverence is joy that's been naturalized in a way. There are a lot of, I mean, gratitude, joy, reverence, awe. I mean, there are all these pieces that are big that I don't think are to be strived towards. You consciously give your heart enough breathing room when you're doodling, when you're making art, when you're listening deeply to somebody. And then, they say something and you get tingles. Well, there's a resonance literally that's occurring. And the body is then the gong, as it were, the reflector, and even maybe something they said healed you a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's a state of, it's related, but a state of reverie. And I think, you can achieve that washing dishes or setting the table or caring for, the household or doing art or walking in nature. Because I think that the one missing piece is that there has to be room for the objective psyche to be let in and perceived. So like when you were talking about the burial rituals,
Yeah.
I'm this is my own bias, but in modern, probably American religion, I think when it's, or even Western Europe too, it's a more Protestant tradition when it's highly logos bound. I think it almost banishes the objective psyche. I think there's a crowding out that doesn't allow I think we came up with the acceptable term, non-rational. But the objective psyche, I think, is the sort of the missing piece to make this red bookish, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even last week, when the passage that goes, I think, directly to what you're saying, so logos bound, where it says, "I am madness, you are reason, we are to be married." That's the definition of the psyche, as it were, right there with the objective.
Yeah.
That objective piece getting. I love that you say getting crowded out, and literally crowded out by all people paying service to this empty vessel of a body. And I remember my grandfather, Methodist minister for 66 years, he just winced and just grew, just shook anytime they said they wanted an open casket funeral. And he said that's not congruent with the state of the vessel. And I remember I never really understood that until I got into alchemy in college. And then that whole container and contained, that there was no contained. And it had literally been crowded out by death, except in a crowd of people. So I'm glad you brought that up, Brian, with the piece there, that in the Western piece, we do a disservice, I think, a disreverie, and it's not irreverent, but it's not reverent to that soul piece.
Well, I think that different people will have different perspectives on that. Some people want to gaze upon their loved one, what have you. And so I want to go back to this reading just a little bit further, because I want to explain this essay a little bit more. So Jung in his quote said, "It will be your cathedral, the silent places of your spirit where you will find renewal. Okay, so some of us find renewal at church. And, my mother-in-law now, because it's very hard for her to get out, fortunately, her church is video recording and Zooming their services. So she doesn't have to physically go to church. She can participate in the ritual right from our living room every Sunday, which she's doing today. So your cathedral can be whatever you think it is, and your cathedral can be, the forest or the sea or what have you. So reading on here, your cathedral, one's own church as an ecclesia spiritualis. This is the pressing issue today, according to Jung. We are in a period of turbulent transitions, in an interim of history. However, just how postmodern radical plurality and incarnatio continua are entangled with each other remains a mystery. Perhaps this logical contradiction is the sign of a deeper truth. Even if it took centuries, as Jung suspected, before the new God image would constitute itself, the new collective myth already is delineated, and the individual consequently called upon to actively contribute to the foundation of a new religion in the form of an invisible church. As this is just in the form of an invisible church. And so I just want to comment that, we are all called upon to actively contribute to the foundation of a new way of looking at society. That we're called upon to do that every election year, and that's true everywhere. And the invisible aspect of what is an American, or what does it mean to be an American? That's significant, and each of us is called upon to make our own contribution in our own way, whatever it is, regardless of your political stripes. And so, anyway, as this is described in a dream and during an ensuing talk of Max Zeller with Jung himself, quote, so Max Zeller had this dream, and this is what his dream was. A temple of vast dimensions was in the process of being built. As far as I could see ahead, behind, right, and left, there were incredible numbers of people building on gigantic pillars. I too was building on a pillar. The whole building process was in its very first beginnings, but the foundation was already there. The rest of the building was starting to go up, and I and many others were working on it. Unquote. Jung said, yes, that is the temple we all build on. We don't know the people because, believe me, they build in India and China and in Russia and all over the world. That is the new religion. You know how long it will take until it is built, I said. How should I know? Do you know? He said, I know. I asked how long it would take. He said, about 600 years. Where do you know this from? I asked. He said, from dreams, from other people's dreams, and from my own. This new religion will come together as far as we can see. So where does that leave us? Well, I'm not going to bother to read the rest of it. You can get this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, and read this incredible essay by Thomas Arst. it sums up everything. But, you know, some things were not very well understood until, you know, I've been working with this essay for nearly a decade now, and I'm finally understanding what is meant by having your own red book. What is meant is you construct something, you believe in something, and you actually build it. It may be invisible. We Americans are all building the American dream, and we always have been. And very often, um, it's immigrants to this country who have the best, most clear vision of what America is and should be. I remember one time going to a naturalization ceremony on the 4th of July, and there were people from 27 different countries who all were becoming American citizens. And by American citizens, I mean U.S. citizens. And I said to several of them, you know, you represent the finest of America, and if we forget, you please remind us, because I think that people who have been in America for generations, many generations, my family, a part of it, has been here for now 15 generations. We forget what it's all about. And what it's all about is that we are literally importing into our country the best brains of the world. Okay, absolutely. The people that get out of their dystopian countries are the smart ones, the ones that know to get away and know to find a place where they can thrive with their own psyche and so on. So, any comments, Jordan?
I'm
Right.
doing some math here. When you mentioned the 600 years, that's always struck me as, what's that based on? It's coming out of nowhere, except it's not coming out of nowhere. I mean, Jung could
Well,
see feelings as well as facts. I mean, he might just look up and know the answer because he sees the fact, or he
well,
might look.
I think
But
I think he was ignorant, right? Because he was basing that statement based on what he was seeing in his consulting room, based on people who were living in the early 20th century. And today, we're operating at warp speed compared to where he was. And he did not know, he probably didn't have any clue what computers could do. He died in 1961. Well, the first time we ever heard of a UNIVAC computer was like 1956. You know, the government knew about computers, yeah, but who knew about computers? I mean, I carried a slide rule back and forth to school every day of my high school. I didn't have a calculator. I remember when I got my first calculator, I had to drive to the other side of the county to find one that was available for sale. And that was when I was already a practicing lawyer. And so Jung had no idea of the warp speed of how things are developing now. So I think we can sort of discount that 600-year period because information is getting around awful fast, including
I
it
don't.
in this session, right?
Well, yeah, I can see your point, but I indefatigably disagree. I think the technology curve has gone way up, and the evolution curve hasn't changed at all. It's still doing this normal thing. And I think, yeah, we have more information, but that's just like mansplaining or, verbal diarrhea, vomiting, technical, this, that, and the other. And I think there's a concept of going slow to go faster. And I think the people 100 years ago were probably a lot healthier than us. I mean, Brian can probably speak to this, but the first heart attack probably came after, was it early 1900s? And then we have, after World War II, the oxidation of seed oils in the system, which are not made for human consumption. They're made for industrial lubricants and sugar and et cetera, et cetera. And I see that we have a hubris that all this technology makes us appear smarter, but I think there's a giant appearance versus reality where, it's nipping on the poison teat. And the phone always turned upside down and down on the table. It's not on a vibrate, I look at it occasionally, but it's not waiting for the dopamine hit of, oh, someone pay attention, junk mail, actual communications. I think that we're psychologically in distress and grasping for straws with, king of the mountain, I know more than you do, instead of how are your perennials faring this season?
Sure.
Looking over the fence, hanging out for a second, talking with a neighbor, in the front 40. So Brian can probably speak to this better medically, but I think that there's just such a whole system generated by quick dopamine hits, which over time anesthetize people, desensitize people, and then they don't even know what they feel because they haven't had an actual full steeped in feeling. And from a gambling psychology perspective, I read an article several years ago, even on scratcher tickets, you get people who are there doing the scratcher, and let's say 33 is a winning number and they get a 34. Oh, almost. Well, no, it's not almost. It wasn't even near. It only works if it's on. But they discovered that even on slot machines, a 7, or a cherry, and people get the same dopamine hit with that second double symbol as they do when they win. So they plateau. What happens? They realize just by giving them the 2, they keep them shoveling the money in. But that's consistently getting a dopamine hit. And that to me is the, if I'm always in my phone, where I can take the phone and I can set it down. And honestly, when I'm at my table, the only reason I use my phone is to use my Square reader to take someone's credit card. I mean, I just take that out of my whole life for the whole 8 hours or whatever I'm there. I'm not a doctor like Brian, so if I don't answer my phone, no one's gonna die, So anyway, Brian.
Yeah. Brian, any comment here?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is we used to die of infection. There was a long time when, the probably mean survival was somewhere around, having reproduced and a little, rump on top of that. And then I think for a long time, it was a little better than that. And it's interesting because there are these consciousness. I don't know if you know anything about Jean Gebser, but he's a what would you say, a conceptualist. He wrote mainly right after World War II, but he went to the Aranos conferences, so he knew Jung, but he he writes about these stages of consciousness that are at first this human consciousness stage was this archaic, no difference between the outside world and the inside world, probably for 160,000 years, and then the next one I think was the magical And these are, structural the structure of consciousness, where it's more like a 2-dimension. And then I'm trying to remember what the third one is, but it's basically that kind of corresponds to agriculture, and then next corresponds to like metals. And then the last one that he was able to recognize is the perspectival, is what he calls it, but it was the ability to see perspective, which is like Raphael era. And that we're on the cusp of becoming a perspectival. Point being is that we still have the same genes. They've been selected, of course. But, there's also this sort of, these paradigm emergences of different consciousness states. And I think that the next one, this thing that there's something burgeoning happening now, in this turmoil and chaos, I think I think it's most people have the sense that something's happening.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing is that at each of these stages, we came up with a technology or set of technologies. And, and these gave us some advantages and some disadvantages.
Well,
I'm sorry.
What's his name again?
Gebser. He was
GOEB. Right.
GEBSER. Jean as in French.
Okay.
GEAN. He has an interesting life, but but it's just interesting that there's always this sort of like net positive gain if you think about lifespan. Although now we're having, at least in the United States, we're having a loss of lifespan. To things like they call them deaths of despair. Addiction, alcoholism with cirrhosis, and
people don't understand the way their own psyche works. Okay, give an example of famous novelists, for example, Hemingway or Henry Miller, or an artist like Jackson Pollock. They didn't know really how to get back. They had, in the case of Hemingway and Henry Miller, they had writer's block. They didn't know how to get to the healing power that was flowing through them entirely when they were writing their best novels. I mean, Hemingway won the Nobel Prize for literature, but in the end he commits suicide at age 63 because he can't get back to that space. And Henry Miller and Jackson Pollock both drank themselves to death one way or another. And so, but now we can look and we can see, what I have to do is to engage with my unconscious. And if I engage with my unconscious, that's going to make a huge difference in my satisfaction in life because of the healing power that I'll find there. And so however you do that, you can do that through the church. You can do that through, cutting your grass or what have you. But you have to find a way to get back to the satisfaction of your own life. Or, I'm sure that if Hemingway or Henry Miller understood these things, they could easily probably get back there. I know that when I wrote a novel, it came entirely from the unconscious. It seized me entirely. But now I know how to get to that place again. Okay, I know how to call upon that unconscious stream if I want to. Okay, and Michael Crichton made the comment once that the way to write a novel is to ask a question. And what I found is that when I asked a question, my psyche, my unconscious, started to feed me all kinds of stuff. And all I had to do was take dictation, basically, right? But if you don't know how to get to that place, and you try to get to that place by drugs or alcohol, you're not going to succeed. But that was a very common approach for famous artists for hundreds of years, and they killed themselves. That's why they ended up dying young, many of them.
Well, and I spoke to this last week, and I'm glad you brought up Gebser, Brian, because it reminds me of um, um, what's his name? Julian Jaynes, the psychologist Julian Jaynes. He had the book, The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And to simplify all that, like the ancient Egyptians, everything was symbolic. And it wasn't really polytheistic. There was no difference from the outside and the inside. You were one with nature and you were in your place and context. But then if I take that forward to Skip's mowing the lawn, well, you're taking care of, like rose roots take care of no weeds around the house. I mean, they're very strongly naturally territorial to keep the place free of clutter. So in a sense, that mowing the lawn or doing the dishes, you are taking care of your extended boundaries so that you can see clearly and from a predatory primal sense, not be surprised by something incoming. But then this here, I mean, I just go back to Skip's mowing the lawn. I think they're washing the dishes. There's a piece there where you are completely immersed in an action and you don't have to think or feel, but you drop in. And I wonder, and I think I mentioned this last week, I wonder if people who try to re-access that state, it's folly, because that state will never exist again. It only existed at that one moment. And now that state is now different. And so when you go to drink, you may be synonymously approximating, but you're then out of your own context. You're literally out of your mind. And so I think what happens is the discipline of a continued action. I remember to get, if I just needed a break and I was writing like 100, 200 page, whatever specification book, and I'm so in the facts only, and I'm on a deadline, so I can't really take a whole lot of breaks. But I'd stop, open another file, ASDF JKL semicolon, ASDF JKL semicolon, and I would just look out the window and keep doing that ASDF JKL semicolon until I just chilled back and came back. And then I'd go back and type fast to the specs, but I was refreshed because, the AS, just a home row on the typewriter or the keyboard was just like washing dishes or mowing the lawn. I could be doing something, but muscle memory was taking it over. So, the train hard enough, the old martial arts maxim was train hard enough so that the mind forgets and the body remembers. And then you're there, and the substance was actually action rather than liquid or some other stimulant.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to share to you for you metaphorically what I think I'm talking about too. We are. I find that in my work, I have kids literally attacking me in so many ways, verbally during the day. And the mildest of it would be, oh, you're an old man, you're going to be dead soon, or you crippled old creep. That's a pretty mild form of what I get, but I get it 8 hours a day during my work.
That's
And
a lot of consonant alliteration.
pardon?
Crippled old creep. Let's look at the internal rhyme of the consonants, the alliteration. Crippled old creep.
Yeah.
That's poetic.
And so what we have to remember is that there's not a roadmap in our brain. Okay. And so when I'm doing what I do for my spiritual health now, which is painting, and I always have to remember that I'm living in a soup that has no lines. Okay, it has no boundaries, and so I'm going to just share a recent painting of mine. This is not complete. Okay, this is just putting down color, and this is. Yeah, I put none of these lines in. The lines were put in naturally by the watercolor in wet paper, on wet paper, and this is what happened. And this chaos is really what we all experience every day, because all kinds of crazy things are happening and we don't know what's coming. And so a lot of what I'm doing in my work, in my um, painting work, is I then take um, that chaos, and I start drawing in lines. So here's uh, one of my recent pieces, and I'm not doing this for selling. I'm doing this for my own mental health, right? That's all. And so what I do is I take the chaos in one of these images and I start to draw lines. And when I draw the lines, and the lines are drawn on color boundaries where two colors come together, the images start to become sensible. And so, for example, I can call this piece the tree of life, because to me it represents the tree of life. And so I could get that by drawing these lines, which are a logical function, right? A rational function, so that I can delineate where that chaos is going, and it has meaning to me then. Whereas that first one that I showed has no meaning. It's just random color on a page. But when I start working with it and drawing rational lines in it, it starts to have meaning. And so it's like having a pile of sticks and you're going to turn it into a piece of furniture. Um, you're going to have to apply the rational side of your mind to figure out how you're going to make that piece of furniture out of that random pile of sticks, and maybe some glue and a few screws or something like that. And so the point is that this binds me up. So in the morning, before I go to school, if I work on this for an hour, what happens to me is I can literally feel it making me feel better. Okay, I can literally feel the rationality um, coming back into my psyche and giving me, lines in my psyche, so I know where I'm going. And so when I go into school in the morning, I'm ready for the attacks that I know which will be coming. And so anyway, those are just some thoughts. Any comments on what I said?
I hold on, I'm just pasting it in.
I mean, so
Brian just
you know,
said-
the same applies to our
Sure.
politics today. For example, we're seeing all kinds of people saying all kinds of different things, and it is chaotic. And what we have to do is take them one at a time and just work out, what does it mean if we do this or that? And you know, what does this person mean? Draw lines around them and see how they stack up in what you want to see in your life, in your family, in your religion, in your country. Because otherwise the chaos will overwhelm us, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and I think I think what I see so much, one of the primary healthy pieces of you, especially with those, those young men, early teenage boys, they also can see you not being reactive.
Mhm.
And you can be their mentor and their tormentor at the exact same time, which is pretty much the definition of a healthy parent, the mentor slash tormentor. And but what's interesting is it's just like, son to dad, daughter to mom, or daughter to dad, son to mom, first sibling or second sibling to first sibling. The second sibling will just often attack the first one, but it's not jealousy. They're learning to fight up. And so they're learning from the wisdom of someone who's maybe, a year, 2, 3 years, however many years older than them. They're basically Abraham Lincoln, learn from others' mistakes. You don't have time to make them all yourself. And and I think that you're providing, I wouldn't say a surrogate dad. You're providing the actual mentor tormentor that's missing, because no one else will be whoever their dad was.
Yeah.
But you, in that sense, in the role as mentor tormentor, they can learn how to maybe not waste energy. Where after a while, name calling and bluster, well, that person's tired by the time anything actually happens. If you're in a constant state of physical arousal towards a altercation, well, you're bleeding energy.
Yeah.
That's why beware the quietest person in the room, because when something starts, they're completely fresh. And they've been sitting there like waiting for you to let's watch their power battery get down to about 60%, and then no matter how skilled they were, they're going to be blunderingly making mistakes. So I think they can see you as human, but you're their mentor tormentor. And whether it's actually mean, and that could be their environment, that's all they've experienced as attention giving. But that they have someone. That's the thing, is that I think that they're not cast off by their dad, and which I'd actually have to say father, because in that sense it's too formal and too gone. Whereas dad, capital D, is a pretty personal. You don't say sir, you say dad. I mean, it's a whole different kind of things. I think what you're doing, is a big service, honestly, for mankind, because
we'll see.
was it 1 in 22 kids in California are now autistic? I mean, that's a whole nother story. But
okay, well, let's go on with this essay by John Hill. Now, John Hill is a Jungian analyst. He is one of the translators of the Red Book, and he from German into English, right? And he lives in Europe, I believe. I don't really know his nationality offhand, but he in the in the play that I played in at our confluence in 2022, the analyst and the rabbi, John Hill, I think he played the role of the rabbi, so that you can see who he actually is, if you can find that version, which is not our version, obviously, but anyway, so here's John Hill talking, and the name of his essay, and I'm on page 143 of this book, the first volume of Jung's Red Book for Our Time. His essay is entitled "Confronting Jung: The Red Book Speaks to Our Time." What happened to Jung when writing his Red Book? I witnessed his labors when invited to act in a theater production on passages from the Red Book, together with Darian Pictet, Paul Brüche, and Murray Stein. We performed in various countries. Not only did we read the book, but learned passages by heart and embodied them in action. I was given 3 roles: Elijah, Isdabar, and Philemon. Drama is a wonderful experience to experiment with one's identity, who we are not. The Red Book performance encouraged us to explore Jung's vision of the psyche as an arena of multiple personalities that stimulates the imagination and provides a stage for the dissociated parts of the self to emerge and gain presence in the conscious mind. Following Jung's odyssey through the labyrinth of his inner world, we began to see his journey as a process to confront, understand, and partially integrate the hidden subpersonalities that rule over our lives when we least expect them. Playing the roles of Elijah, Isdabar, and Philemon was a challenge. The prophet, the warrior, and magician are powerful archetypal figures. I had to invest all my energy in the roles to make them come alive. This was the work of imagination. Inevitably, it created dissociation, even inflation. After I had finished each role, I needed several minutes of silence. The interval gave me a chance to recover and click into the next role. I had to struggle to gain control over the roles so that they would not control me. For several days after each performance, the words and emotions of Elijah, Isdabar, or Philemon would spontaneously emerge, and I would find myself in a state of dissociation until I could finally shake them off and go about my usual business. Nevertheless, some parts of me are prophet, warrior, and magician. It was helpful to remember that these roles were not identical with the conscious ego. They belong to the collective heritage of humankind and influence each other, each one of us according to our level of consciousness and how they play out in fate or destiny. In enacting each role, I noticed how they underwent transformation after each performance. I believe this was largely due to the exchanges with my colleagues, Paul Brüche and Darian Pictet, who performed the roles of Jung and Salome, respectively. Playing the roles gave me the opportunity to connect with Jung from inside of those other personalities that judged him, loved him, challenged him, humiliated him, and inspired him. It was like seeing Jung within the larger framework of his own psyche, seeing the one from the many, the ego from the complexes, the self reflected in a pleroma of archetypes. I will end with some reflections on what the exchange with these 3 figures could have meant for Jung, for psychology, and for our time. Now, I'm going to take a bio break. You want to carry the ball here, Jordan?
Sure. It reminds me, honestly, of creating my tarot deck. I called it my psychotic seasons. because I would walk around my office and just talk as if I was in theater on a stage as the card.
Mhm.
And literally the abracadabra I create as I speak, I would talk until I started to shut up and I sat down and started painting or drawing. And sometimes it would just go straight into the computer. It got to the point where that was my paintbrush and it wasn't translation anymore. I had synced with the medium. And it's interesting because afterwards I would always walk out and walk in the garden, and whether I took deep breaths or stomped around or did some random wiggly moving, there was kind of like an adrenaline dump like cats and dogs do after really vigorous activity or stress, where the adrenaline's coursing through your veins, but if you literally just do a quick shake, it drops, and you can get the tingles and get out of that hyper aroused state. But I noticed that if I didn't do that, the rest of my day would go into a funk. And what it was that I was stagnating in, basically, I'm supposed to be up, except I'm too used to it. And so it kind of slows down in the upper octaves. So, in a sense, again, that tired quality. And then I may be the quietest person in that room, but because I'm halfway asleep and thinking I'm still needing to go, and I'm not. So I think it's interesting, the psychotic seasons that I call them probably wasn't truly psychotic, but the character acting piece got me out of myself and showed me actionable avenues to create these cards. And to create is the formless. That was the abracadabra. I create as I speak. And then it became I create as I move. And then I create as I begin to paint. Then that's to make. And that's giving form to the formless. So it's interesting because it directly follows the classic Greek roots of architecture, which are arche and techne. And arche is to create. First part, formless, to create. Techne is to make, to give form to the formless, to bring the heart of the matter of the creation spark as the heart of the matter or marrow. So those together were just an interesting similarity. I just went through, Skip, I call the psychotic seasons when I created the deck. My tarot deck is I became the cards walking around my office, and on one or two, I guess this is the last piece to add to that. On one or two, I sat down to become the cards. That's where I would get stuck. And what happens is it was hard. I could walk out in the garden and I kind of would be halfway liminal, but in a sense, you kind of brain stall, but not in a way where you feel this is a meditative loss in a good, like you're lost in a good way. So I found that the walking meditations, moving, running, jumping, being the cards, were the best way, in a sense, like a road trip, to keep the exhausting. And I think when you sit in place in that kind of creation meditation, I think you can kind of smoke yourself out, because you're sitting in the effluence, as it were, instead of, which in a sense could make you a little woozy. But I found that walking meditation, of becoming a character, was basically doodling with verbs, as it were, instead of painting with colors. So I really appreciate his example here of playing the roles of Elijah, Isdabar, and Philemon. I would see that Jung bringing those out is a similar activity.
Right. And Brian, did you have a comment?
Well, it's interesting that to be able to say manifest the cards is just another example. Archetype is self-organizing principle, that there's a kernel there that to which psychic energy adheres in a pattern.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was that kernel. In fact, that idea of the kernel, I mean, to me, even came from Nietzsche in a way, because it was, what is the kernel that I'm going to sprout so that my deck is just the deck I create? It's not derivative of other decks. It's not modifying other decks. It's how does my deck grow from that kernel? And that archetype is infinitely able to be like a symbol, infinitely generative, infinitely interpretable. And I'm proud, I think, of what I did, because I get people who've never seen the deck and they're like, wow, these cards are alive, and I can read them, and it doesn't even feel to be intuitive. They start to read pictures.
Mhm.
And in a sense, if I can get them into kindergarten, so to speak, then, once upon a time, this card says what, the end, and they can tell the story. And I love that when they see something in the card that is absolutely a sequence, and I look at it and go, I made the card and I never saw that. So there's a
Mhm.
whole, how much nature went in that I didn't even know about, that I haven't seen yet.
Yeah. And what I want to observe is that these archetypes are within all of us. Okay, they are absolutely within all of us. In my own life, let's take the three. Warrior. Okay, I was a United States Marine. I'm a retired United States Marine officer. I served to Lieutenant Colonel. My last job was writing all the performance standards of every military occupational specialty in the Marine Corps. And yet, almost certainly, if unless you know that, you probably wouldn't have suspected it by watching my videos. And I found that when I put my uniform on, I changed. I archetypally became the archetypal Marine Corps officer. And and I could feel it happening to me at the time, and I still do when I put my uniform on, which I occasionally do for special occasions. I will do again on Veterans Day. Um, I feel myself change in those moments, and one of the aspects of being a warrior is a kind of arrogance. And of course, the way I ended my Marine Corps career was slipping on the ice on a parking lot and breaking my leg. I literally broke my leg as the last thing I did in uniform. And uh, that's not very heroic, and it's not very archetypal, but nonetheless, if you get too arrogant, it can happen to you. And it
Well,
obviously did to me. Go ahead.
I have to pair up with you there, because the wonderful self-deprecation part of, I was an advanced black belt instructor,
Hmm.
and I broke my nose, and people are like, oh, well, was it in a tournament? I'm like, no, that was the 30 days afterwards. It would heal and snap. And then finally I'd walk into the ring and I'd snap it myself, because 24 hours of, but they would think I was crazy. Oh my God, that guy broke his own nose. So it kind of dispensed with their adrenaline body and their confidence. But back to, how did I break my nose? Advanced black belt instructor, allegedly physically pretty wonderfully coordinated, great balance. I did a backflip and I kneed myself in the nose.
There you go.
So, not balanced, not coordinated. And I mean, fortunately, the knee comes straight up, so it broke pretty straight. I had to straighten it a little bit, but I laugh that people are like, oh, well, what happened? It's like, it's not valiant. This is not a warrior thing. This is I tried to do a back flip differently. And, the human brain, it doesn't, this hinge here and the
Mhm.
hinge at the pelvis, guess what? They're different. And
Yeah.
so when you stop your head rotation, that knees it keeps on coming.
Right.
So,
So the second one is magician, and I point back to Olivia Newton-John's song, "You Have to Believe We're Magic," and my point is that uh, if if I wish to create something in a magical sense, uh, many people will think that it's magic. And I remember when I first started to build a company in Japan, the partner company had this older gentleman who had been a Japanese Marine at the end of World War II, and he had been a young Japanese Marine, and then he came back and he lucked out and became a house painter for AG Toyota, which meant ultimately that his company uh, makes all the paints for Toyota automobiles. And so he became extremely wealthy and successful. Um, but I remember sitting in his office one day, and we were talking about what I was planning to do in Japan, and he said, "You will fail." And he was about, I don't know, 40 years my senior. And I said, well, we'll see. And so I did everything that I said I would do. Um, and, and on another occasion, I one of the things my company did was make it made narrow weave pile, and one of our products was a Teflon pile. In other words, it was a strip of cloth with Teflon pile sticking through it like a rug, but very small, strips about that wide, right? And I was given a 1 square inch of this because this stuff was like gold at the time. And I had that in my briefcase. It was 1 square inch of Teflon pile. And I was in an engineering conference at Toyota, and they were having a problem because what they were doing was putting little wheels um, inside their doors of their cars to let the window go up and down in the door, but the little wheels were squeaking, and uh, and so they wanted a solution to it, and it had been raining that day, and the windows were weeping inside. That's an entirely different story. But anyway, the windows were wet on the inside of the room where we were. And so I said, well, I wonder if you could use this. And I pulled out my little 1 square inch of Teflon pile, and he takes it and he goes over to the window and rubs it as hard as he can against the window. And it didn't squeak. And the next week, our partners in Japan who were doing the weaving in Japan got an order for 80,000 meters of Teflon pile, uh, which was like a bomb of an order. I mean, it was like maybe $500,000 or something like that. And because Toyota found out that they could just make a flange inside, they didn't have to create a structure in the form of a wheel. They could just have a flange with this Teflon pile on it, and that would serve the same purpose, directing the window. And of course, if the little wheels were wearing out and dropping off, then they would scratch the window. So there'd be a vertical scratch on the windows. And some of us remember car windows that would get scratches on them. We wouldn't know why, and that's why. So my partners just thought I was magic because I could pull out this little 1 square inch of Teflon pile and immediately give them like a $500,000 order. And they thought I was cuckoo clock. I had showed it to them at our office before we went to the Toyota meeting, and they thought I was a cuckoo clock. What are you using Teflon pile for?
Mhm.
And I just went to this meeting and kept my mouth shut, and the guy's talking about this problem. I said, geez, would this work?
Yeah. And then he picks it up and he knows exactly what, the
Yep,
application. And then
absolutely.
your tricky little application then later was utilized underneath doors for door sweeps.
Yeah, so you have to believe your magic, and that when you start something like starting this YouTube channel, you know, when I started it, what did I have? Nobody following me. And I just started doing it. And, if you build it, they will come. That's a pretty good thing.
Mhm.
If you build something, people will come to it and like it. And it's not everybody that likes it, but several hundred people a week look at these videos, and the ideas that we express during these sessions ripple out into society. So, if it was the 16th century, that would take 600 years to ripple out into society. But here we can ripple it out into society in one day, globally. Okay.
What I notice, sometimes something Brian or you or I say on any given Sunday morning, and within an hour or sometimes by this afternoon on Instagram or some Facebook ad or something, there will be that quote exactly.
Yeah, surely.
And attributed sometimes to someone different than we said it was. And then I'll look it up. And I'm like, oh, wow, they went two authors back in origin. It wasn't
Mhm.
who I thought it was, but it's someone previous. And so, T.S. Eliot, good poets borrow, great poets just outright steal. Um, there's a whole piece of that connection. And part of it, too, sometimes if I want to do some research later, I'll just make sure my phone's within earshot. And I'll just, say, please, like bicameral mind, psychology, psychological context. I'll just spit out things. And what happens is I'm basically delegating a Google search for
Mhm.
all the things that come up on the feed and between this stuff. They'll all be about what I was asking for. So people are like, "Oh my God, Big Brother's watching you." I'm like, "I'll use Big Brother. They're now the butler.
Yeah.
Please go get me this." Um, so if there's that, but I laugh that I can say something, just talk about it, and for the next 72 hours, I will have ads or things relative to that in my feed pop up as
Oh,
if
yeah.
it's the algorithm of it's pulling up. So I think there's back to perspectivizing Brian was talking about. I can whine and moan and bitch about being listened to, or I can utilize it.
Yeah.
And then it's not all conspiracy this or conspiracy that. It's and honestly, anyone assigned to listen to me, I really pity their job. I'm not that interesting, so it's like hope they get someone more fun to listen to.
Right. And let's see, I want to see if I can find one. Okay, so the final part is profit. And what I find is that when I'm painting my images, um, I'm getting prophecy right in my paintings. And so an example is this one, where I painted this, and things came up, and so I was seeing The orange man. Well, I think of myself as an orange man because I'm a 1/4 Dutch American, and the Dutch royal house is the Princess of Orange. So I think of that. And so I think either the orange man in the center of this picture is either me or it's Donald Trump. Um, and I didn't really know who it was, but it came up, and then I saw the shadow come up. And what do I have in the back of the head here in this painting is the Grinch. And what I noticed about the Grinch was that the Grinch was being operated by this monkey that's inside inside the Grinch. So the shadow is being operated by monkey business, right? And then in these images, yellow represents hope. And so what we see going off out into the distance in the future is here evil is being split in two. And so you see an eye here and an eye here being split in two. And then on this side, you see an orange middle finger giving us the bird as he goes out into the future. And so um, I thought that was pretty prophetic. And also the elephant here looking toward the past. I thought that that was also pretty prophetic about what we're getting in our current affairs right now. So prophecy can come from anybody, and not that, I didn't intentionally do any of that. I just followed my process, and that's what came up when I
It's
look back
interesting.
at it.
I read yesterday, and I halfway agree with this, and I don't in any way wholly agree with it, but it said you can only be intuitive about things you know. So, like the heart surgeon during surgery that knows to reach over and clamp because now he just feels it's about to have a bleeder. I
Mhm.
mean, whereas your mechanic can tell your brake clips or your calipers are you know out of out of whack, just pulling up, just the feel of it. So it's interesting to me that the informing our intuition, it's like the external knowledge going in. But then where I disagree with that is that that's not the only way. There's the internal knowledge coming out and from the unconscious where I may not know anything about it. And even with the tarot cards, creating them, some of the images came and I looked and eyebrows up and went, that's not that card. And then the more I looked at it, I went, no, that is that card. That
Mhm.
whole kernel that opened up. It was so different than anything I'd ever seen that I call it T-boned by beauty. Except I've never seen that, so I'm startled in a way. A friend of mine, it's like the amygdala, fight, flight, freeze kind of thing. And I don't think those are individual states. I think they're a triangulated. Please come back outside. You're about to trip on the concrete. Because it's a you're inhabiting the inside. Come on out. You're in danger. And a friend of mine, I've totally stolen her statement. She never spells out AMYGDALA amygdala anymore. She's like, no, that's that bitch Amy, and she's not in your best interest most times. So I
Right.
think that informed intuition of we can't be intuitive about what we know nothing of. I think that's the zone. That's that groove. You get in that place. But then going the other way, I think we get new psychic contents from the unconscious. And there's the nourishing piece that gives us things we absolutely don't know anything about. And I
Sure.
think that's called creativity. I mean,
Well, and obviously that's the point in major way of both the tarot and astrology, which is um, when you give a tarot reading, um, the person who's listening to your reading is having to psychologically deal with whatever it is you say. And what that, the effect of that is to open their unconscious. And so then they start very quickly seeing other things which you don't see and they didn't see before, but come from the healing power of their unconscious. And that's the strength of tarot, and that's the strength of astrology. That I have this one astrology feed that gives me a reading every day in the morning, and I always read it, and it's almost invariably bang on to what's happening in my life at any given time. And I go, whoa, that's really amazing that this astrologer who's writing, anonymously to me, I don't know who writes the pieces, and who doesn't know me at all, and yet can write an astrology reading for any given day that pretty much hits the nail on the head. And obviously an element of that is this psychic healing, the opening the unconscious and letting something flow in.
It's interesting to say that, because I mean, I notice a marked difference between before I finished my deck and after I finished my deck, and just professionally how I read. And before I finished my deck, it was about being professional and intuitive, and I have to be wise, and I have to give a good reading. There was still performance there. And what's interesting about that is after I finished my deck, it's, oh, I need to share this process with people. I'm the driver's ed instructor on a road trip. You drive. I'll tell you about, turn left. That tree's cool. Get them to get into the marrow of the matter. So there's a whole, once upon a time, what does this card tell you? I think one of the key things, I didn't think about this until just now, but I just noticed that I notice when they engage, when they emote. If they well up into something, I just stop and I say, stay with that. Which of these images is moving you? And they'll, sometimes they'll scan and choose, but sometimes it's something I said in combination with, but they can shed what I said and they can immerse in the image, and then they begin talking, and oftentimes then I really have to mind the time, because we might be there an hour that goes that fast because they accessed. And the length of a reading, it's not going to change the price. And just that's gouging. To me, they each have their own life. And so when that occurs, that's the blessing of what I'm doing, to me.
Yeah, sure.
Because then they leave fulfilled, invigorated, and not the, oh yeah, my mind was blown, and they don't remember a damn thing later. I mean, and I let them record if they want. I always have them take a picture of the cards. I say, you'll forget what I said, but remember how you feel, and let that unfold by just opening up the images, and then they'll speak to you of your own. So I think, your process there with the warrior, magician, the prophet, it's important, I think, then in community to share the red book, so to speak, or black books that we're doing, because we each bring back things differently.
Right. Absolutely.
It could be the same thing, but
I'm going to read one more page here before the end of this particular session, and then we'll come back to this next week. But this section is called Elijah. So this is John Hill talking about his experience of acting in this play in the role of Elijah. In enacting Elijah, I had to identify with the Old Testament prophet. I was omniscient, a semi-god who knew the secrets of the universe. I was severe and was going to tell Jung exactly what he had to do. But already in the opening of the Mysterium scene, I felt incomplete. I was united with darkness, embodied in the blind Salome, as evident when I said, "Consider this, her blindness and my sight have made us companions through eternity." These words immediately reminded me of the biblical text of the book of Proverbs 8:22 through 24. The text refers to Sophia as the eternal feminine, embodying God's wisdom that existed before creation. Quote, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before he made anything from the beginning. I was set up from eternity, before the earth was made. The depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived." Unquote. With each performance as Elijah, I felt more attached to and protective of my blind daughter Salome. I was becoming gentler and less judgmental. I was sure Salome was Jung's soul that had become blind. I had to be patient, especially when Jung continued to identify Salome with her New Testament counterpart, as when he said, "Was she not vain, greed, and criminal lust, who shamefully shed the prophet's blood?" I knew that if he could only accept the loving yet blind part of his soul, he would be ready to embrace the new message. Hence, I reminded him of this mystery. But she loved a holy man. She loved the prophet who announced the new God to the world. Eventually, I saw that the mysteries of the new God image were too much for him. He needed time to accept them. He was still too identified with the spirit of the times. He still believed he could solve everything with his intellect by reducing Elijah and Salome to some kind of intellectual symbols. Elijah, however, responded with a powerful voice, quote, "We are real, not symbols," unquote. Comments?
Brian?
I'm still thinking.
It's interesting. The blind to me there comes across as an unconscious soul navigating depths of darks. And that in blindness, if I inhabit that character, become it right now, then I close my eyes and I can't see. I'm looking at the dark in the dark. But I'm not confused. That's my mode of experiencing, so that, forever he has been her eyes in a way. So the goes back to the I am madness, you are reason, we are married.
Yeah. And so I think it's very powerful, this comment. We are real and not symbols,
Yeah.
because they were quite literally real parts of Jung's psyche. And Sherry makes an interesting comment here. She said, "I believe there is a Carl Jung in each of us." Well, there's a certain element of truth in that, it seems to me. And so this has been a fruitful essay to start from today, and we'll go on with it next week. And anything else you want to talk about, Brian, before we sign off?
No, I just think it's important to bear in mind that we are all liminal beings.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're Januses. We face both ways.
Yep.
That's a great point. The Januses face both ways.
Yep.
So best of luck and success to suture removal and continued healing.
Yep. One more hand to do.
Well, yeah, no Bible, no
Yeah,
Bible procedure.
yeah, but I can't do it until I can't do it until this one is healed. So probably a month from now before I'll do it. But anyway, so if you have carpal tunnel syndrome, folks, and how that manifests is I was waking up in the morning and my hands would be tingling at exactly what Brian is doing now, and I would have to shake them to wake my hands up. Um, that's a sign that you're doing damage to your nerves, to the nerve that comes down into your hand. And the solution is this very simple surgery that takes 15 minutes, and they put
Yeah,
you out for,
if you like using this guy,
Mhm.
like do it
yeah,
because you'll lose function in your thumb.
yeah,
It's interesting because I would get the ganglion cysts, with and I don't, in the last actually 9 months, total diet change. I think I've had a bunch of oxalate dumps. So my nerve casings have probably improved. I don't have now, they crack more, but I think it's because that's calcium letting go. But it's interesting because I didn't have true carpal tunnel, but because I think that's degenerative, if I'm correct. But
Yeah, it's
yeah,
on the other side.
it's on, okay, I'm back on here. Okay, yeah, so I didn't. But it's interesting though, um, ways in which the body is like, okay, this needs to be fixed, and then how to fix it. I mean, it's whether it's in a big book or surgery or however. But anyway,
okay. So peace, everyone. We'll see you next week, and hopefully I will survive my first week of school with kids in the building.
yes,
Good luck in
Take care
school.
now.
you got
Yeah.
going in with a